if you're going to be a black person and have integrity, that means that, particularly if you're going to get an advanced degree and you're going to move on, you're going to be surrounded by horrible people who will do horrible things, but will insist that you tell them that the knife they're sticking into your back isn't really there, you know? And I mean, these are good people who voted for Obama, right? And but I see them largely as the same. And I wrote a paper about this once where I really upset a bunch of liberal white people in the room, where I said I used a graph that's out there where it talks about white supremacy being a horseshoe rather than a linear line where there's two opposing views. It's like, no, you're a horseshoe where the starting point is so far away from where you are, but then you are basically almost meeting at a fulcrum, but you're still apart. So you consider yourselves separate, but you go back far enough and you're together. That's where it begins. And so I wrote a piece that talked about that experience in the prison, where I said that if I have to deal with white supremacy.
Do you know that telling a story is one of the most powerful ways to connect with your audience? Do you know that the human brain processes story much more easily and quickly than facts and figure? Stories are a great way to engage your audience, get them interested in your products and services, and inspire them to take action. A good story will help you create more compelling content that can be shared on social media or through other channels. And it's not just about telling a compelling story, it's also about knowing how to tell it effectively. Now, do you want to better connect with your audience? Then join us on our online training class, Storytelling for Content Creators and Digital Entrepreneurs. Come to obehilair14.com/storytelling and learn how to leverage your storytelling skill to earn more as a content creator and digital entrepreneur. Storytelling is a powerful way to connect with your audience, so let's explore it together. See you in the class.
Supremacy, I prefer that it come from conservatives or Southerners, because at the very least, they are honest enough to telegraph their intention, much like how a rattlesnake will rattle. You know, a rattlesnake rattles because it's a warning. You're too big for me to eat, but if you come any closer, you're going to catch some. As opposed to liberal whites who were gingerbread houses, in the Hansel and Gretel sense, where, come on over to my house, you know, isn't this house delicious? Come on in, and right into my oven. And out of that oven comes me, and that's a piping hot mulligan, because they can do all kinds of horrible things inside their gingerbread houses, and because I get neutralized in the oven and baked, there's no accountability, there's no learning from the situation, there's no growing from the situation. I am neutralized, and they can go right back to doing the same thing over and over again. And so if it comes down to it, I'd rather deal with Southern white people who were honest about their racism, to where if they don't want anything to do with me, I don't have to see them. So when I go home to Louisiana, I'll go weeks without seeing white people because they don't want anything to do with me. Whereas in the West, I'm surrounded by white people who want something from me, but don't want me.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. I appreciate your time, your response, and also the value that you're additional to the people here. Now, one thing I want to ask you is that before you did make mention of ethnomusicology. I don't know if you can spend some time explaining that to people who do not understand what the term even means. Help us with that.
Ethnomusicology is it's an offshoot of anthropology, but in specific it's the study of cultural manifestations of music, how music and culture interact. And for me, it's a very good way to study value systems, because with very few exceptions, we all have music. And it's a beautiful thing to see how the human condition is expressed from culture to culture, you know, sadness, happiness, anger, joy, sorrow, uh, or just how you would announce your name, or how you would profess your love, or or how you express your humor, how you admit that something funny happened to you, or something scandalous happened to you, or any of those things. You can really get at a culture's value system by how they express themselves musically, whether or not they got charisma or not, or a sense of humor, those sorts of things. And so it's a very good tell on how a culture expresses itself and its humanity, so to speak, particularly with how the music is transferred from master to child. That part is really important. And so for me, knowing the traditional methods with which I learned from, which comes out of West Africa initially, uh, basically sitting at the foot of an elder master and taking in all of their life lessons, whether they express them verbally or not, or whether or not they're taken as an example of what not to do versus what to do. Uh, you have to take on a little bit. You got to take in a little bit to do that. You can't just read it off a page, right? It's a lived experience where you take these elder. You have to find a way to make yourself acceptable to learn from this master who may give you their information gladly or reluctantly, but you have to sort of meet them where they're at to get it. And so I was really good at that as a child because I spent so much time with older people. And when I moved to LA, I spent a lot of time with older musicians who were slowly disappearing from the scene. And knowing the value of that and that it was disappearing because I saw fewer and fewer people my age and younger who understood that process, I figured that it was incumbent upon me to do something to preserve what was left so that people in the future, if they want to pick up the mantle, we could go back to ritual again. And so for me, it's very important. It's a very personal thing, as opposed to a lot of ethnomusicologists who were just curious about something and observe and record as an object, because it did begin as a vestige of colonialism. Because for the same reasons that I want to understand the African diaspora and the way that we as members of the diaspora express ourselves and how it goes all the way back to pre-colonial Africa, those same characteristics were used as a means to understand communities so they could be subjugated. Napoleon did that with a guy named Vieuxtemps. When they went to Egypt and they found the Rosetta Stone, he brought a man there to study the music so they could understand how these people worked culturally so they could control them better. And a French priest named Amiot did the same thing in China. He went to China to study their music, but really he was sizing them up culturally and militarily for a takeover. And so that's the basis of the discipline. And there are still a lot of people out there who behave in such a way because, this behavior's never been checked, where they literally will mark a territory like a dog will in the woods. And that's their part of the world. And once they have established themselves as the master of whatever this expression is, if you don't get on board with how they do things, even if you can prove that their methods are at fault or wrong, you will be neutralized, which is why I have a problem finding an institutional home because I don't adhere to what some of the standard tropes of Black expression are, because I don't care whether or not white people enjoy what I'm saying or not. I want to make sure that it's correct. And sort of like Bayard Rustin, who was sent to the man who organized the March on Washington, who was sent to a prison camp for 28 days, 10 years before Rosa Parks, for the same infraction of not giving up his seat on a bus. Somebody asked him, why don't you just get up and move to the back of the bus? Like, what's the point? It was a white woman who asked him that. And he said, ma'am, and pointed to a white child. If I give up my seat, that child will not know an injustice is being done. So he said, I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for this child. You're a lost cause, ma'am. This child is not. And so for the people who did that for me, I take every opportunity to do that going forward for every child. I love them as though they were mine because I don't want them coming to take what's mine because they don't have. I want them to be able to go get it for themselves, right? Along with my musical scholarship, I grow my own vegetables, some of which have been in my family since the antebellum period, since enslavement. I raise my own bees. Uh, I eat, with the exception of honey, I eat nothing from an animal, strictly plant-based, but I still know how to hunt. I still know how to fish. I still know how to do all the things that my ancestors used to survive. But when it comes down to it, I try to live a peaceful, moral, and just I try to live a good life, which is difficult if you're a black person because you're expected to constantly give it up to people who don't deserve it and haven't earned it. And the sad part is that very often, particularly in the West, only one is allowed in. They'll bring one in. And if you decide to come in there, these black people who are physically black, but not culturally black, will guard their white people like a toothless dog with a bone. And if you will not get on board with what they're doing, you'll be gotten rid of real quick. They are hired to be diversity and not do diversity. And that's the frustrating part where they continue to do that same old fist jubilee thing where they're giving white people what they want at at the cost of their own integrity, their own cultural standing. And for what? A few dollars?